I want to talk to you today about reframing. Um, and I want to talk about how we've gone through all of these, we went through the inner voice and vitals and comprehensive and easy scan and multi-scan and Cephi and all of these things. And I want to bring everything back to the basics today. I want to reframe how we look at these scans, particularly inner voice. All right. So we have my inner voice scan from a week ago, and I'm looking at note E, which is the highest note, and I'm looking at the areas of the body that are mostly affected when note E is out of balance. We've talked about this before. Every time note E shows up, this image is going to show up. Why? Because this image is associated with note E. It just is. And sometimes you'll see certain things inside of there that you'll see on other notes as well. So note E is not exclusively highlighting these particular points of the body. But when note E shows up, those parts of the body are associated with note E, as they might also be associated with A sharp or C or other notes that you might see there. Just understand that there is an association that's happening there if there is some sort of a weakness in that particular note. Critical versus self-accepting. That's a pendulum, is what I call it, a pendulum of emotions that are associated with note E. You're always going to see it. The positive expressions and the negative expressions. And sometimes people will find, I don't know, they might say self-critical. And they'll say, well, how did it know that I'm self-critical? It doesn't really know that you're self-critical. This is just kind of math. And that particular emotional, not indication, predisposition is a better way to say it. That emotional predisposition is associated with that note. And so if you are out of balance in that note, you are more prone to experience the out of balance portion of this. But here's another way to look at it. And I didn't even think about this until right now. I presented you with this little method where you can put in the numbers, and it's possible that you're going to get all greens sometimes, right? All greens. And that when you get an all green on that numerical chart, what it's telling you is that even though this is your highest note, it's not so far away from the rest of it. And when that happens, start paying attention to the positive emotions that are associated with note E. Most of the time, we don't pay any attention to that part. That part is real as well. The positive and the negative emotions or representation of these emotions are just as real as the positive is just as real as the negative. When you are green, you probably are going to be able to relate with the positive because you're in balance. That's the reason why it's there, to let you know what the opposite extreme of the negative emotion is. But again, that's always going to be there when that note E comes up. So if note E comes up and as your highest note, and you're in the green with note E, or you're not feeling out of balance in any sort of crazy way, then understand that your body is probably operating in balance at that moment. And then start looking at these vitals, these emotions, these potential causes, these imbalances and suggestions. Start looking at those as these are specific to you. They are related to note, what are we at, E? They are related to note E. But what they're telling you is these are the predispositions that your body is displaying on a frequency level associated with that note, that when that note comes out of balance, you might want to take a look at. But as I told you, there's always going to be three emotions. There's always going to be three potential causes. There's always going to be three imbalances and suggestions. And there's always going to be three things on the vitals. If my chart is green and I'm not showing outward expressions that are associated with note E, then this vitals is not to tell me that my liver is in trouble. This vital is to tell me that frequency-wise, liver is vulnerable if I get this note out of balance. Lithium and my relationship to it on a level of frequency is vulnerable when that note is out of balance. Coenzyme Q10 might be something that I might want to look at. And these three things, liver, lithium, coenzyme, Q10, ubiquinol, this might be something that I might want to keep in my back pocket to nourish the specific parts of my body that might keep me in the green. So often when we look at these reports, we're looking at it to find problems. We're looking at it to figure out what's going on, what's wrong. And it's not really our fault, because this is the way we've been taught and trained by the medical system that we've grown up in. When we see a report, just looking for problems. When you're dealing with frequency, you're dealing with fluctuation of energy throughout the body. And it's not necessarily representing what's actually happening. Very often, it's representing tendencies, predispositions, genetic weaknesses from a frequency standpoint. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and then I'll move on, because this class is for you. If you were born of an alcoholic mother or father, you could be born with tendencies in your liver that are susceptible to alcohol, to the point where you might not really be able to drink alcohol because you don't have the mechanism to stop drinking because of your genetic weaknesses. Your liver may become overloaded fast. Your brain might not give you the shutoff notice that you've had enough. You have a predisposition in that sense towards being an alcoholic. But if you never drink, it'll never manifest. But the predisposition is still there. But it doesn't have to be activated. There are people who are not able to break down carbs well. They're not able to process sugars sometimes, natural sugars or artificial sugars. And they have a predisposition towards blood sugar spikes. But if they don't eat in a way that activates that, it never manifests. There are people who are born with predisposition to heart disease. But if they're not eating loads of protein, they never even know it, because it never gets manifested. If all of us had a way to know all of our genetic predispositions and it were displayed to us on paper, we might think we are a walking mess, right? And that's kind of what happens when you analyze the AO scan reports sometimes. You don't realize, or you realize it, but it's hard when it's you, and we're talking about your numbers or the numbers of somebody that you love. It's hard to focus on the fact that you're looking at information of frequencies. And when you take that and don't focus on that, then things become problematic. So my point here is, I'd like to reframe how we look at these things, how we look at your reports for your inner voice, how you might look at your body system reports, and understand in those two reports in particular, there are placeholders there for every single report. And there are a certain amount, I believe in body systems, it's 4. I forget the exact number, but however many there are, there has to be that many in each spot. If there's always going to be that many, you can't take it to mean that this is what's wrong. Take it to look at when you know that you're dealing with something that's wrong. If you know that your circulatory system is damaged, you know that your respiratory system is compromised, then looking at the respiratory report now shows you where your frequency weaknesses are in relation to that system, that body system. Same way with inner voice. This shows you how, from a frequency standpoint, you're vulnerable in relationship to that note. So I'm hoping that that reframing will help to take the pressure off, because listening to your tones is designed to balance it all out anyway. All right. I went over by 4 minutes. I apologize. All right. Any questions? Go ahead and raise your hand if you have any, or type it in the chat.